jumping into the session. And my name is Mark Ellis. I'm at Cal State Fullerton. Some of the names are familiar, so I know we've crossed paths over the years. I've been at Fullerton since 2005. And right now I'm the director of the Math Science Teacher Initiative. And starting next week, when Dr. Waller, who is our FLM coordinator, goes on maternity leave, I will be the interim foundational level math subject area coordinator. So I'm going to jump right in. I want to start by telling you a story to get you to do some thinking around the topic that I'd like to focus on, why math teaching is social justice work. So given that we have a little bit of time and quite a bit I want to get to, I'm just going to jump right into giving you this context. So I'd like you to imagine you're in this classroom with this young learner of mathematics. And just as I read the story description, just imagine yourselves in her shoes. So student A is a 6th grade student. At the beginning of the year, she's very shy. She's kind of reticent, and she hadn't found her voice in the math classroom yet. She had a teacher who created a learning environment in which collaboration, communication, and justification were central to the aim of having students take ownership of math ideas that came from their initial thinking. Students regularly shared their ideas, listened to the ideas of their peers, and used these to make sense of math concepts and relationships with the teacher's guidance. The teacher supplemented the standard curriculum with contextual problems that were designed to connect key math concepts, relationships, and skills with local cultural practices and ways of thinking. One of these units was called Building a Fish Rack. And you could Google that, it is a real unit, which had students create racks to dry salmon, which was common in their Alaska Native Yupik community. And they used methods based on relative units of measure. So each rack is made proportional to the person using it. And through this, students developed the concept of proportional reasoning in mathematics. And then they were asked to apply this to contexts involving Western standard units of measure like feet and meters. And student A was really enjoyed this unit because she spent a lot of time with her grandfather fishing and drying salmon. So during the course of the school year, the student developed more confidence in sharing her mathematical reasoning and emerged as a leader in class discussions in mathematics. Her teacher described her as quote, a genius because she often had really novel and mathematically rich ways of representing the concepts and relationships. So imagine yourself in that classroom. What are some of the things going through your mind as you're in that classroom? And you can shout it out if you want. You can type it in the chat, and we'll just spend like 30 seconds on this, and I'll move on to student B. What are some things that enter your mind as you think about this classroom and this learner's experience?
Okay, I'll say something. I just think this, most students tell us, I don't get math and why do I need it? And suddenly the students in the classroom where this foreign concept of math totally relates to something that she understands and gets her excited and engaged in probably a way she maybe didn't even anticipate in a math class.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Heather, appreciate that. I see in the chat, it gives a purpose for learning math, yep. Other thoughts that went through your mind if you're in this classroom, if you're in this learner's shoes? Creative, wish all experiences could be like this. Yes, we're working on it. Okay, so the general feeling you have is very positive, and this was very affirming to her sense of identity and helped her realize that mathematics was something that could be part of her world. So let's hear the story of student B then. Student B, also a middle school learner, started the year eager to learn mathematics. The teacher in student B's classroom set up a learning environment that focused on students individually following procedures that were demonstrated by the teacher to help them get correct answers. The problems they worked on were decontextualized, or they were in contexts that were unfamiliar. Students often did several problems that were the same or very similar, following the steps to get the answer. Students got rewards if they could catch their peers with a wrong answer and were allowed to play games on the computer when their work was completed. This created among many of the students a sense of competition, which some of them liked. Student B did her best to follow the teacher's rules for doing math, but had trouble understanding why the steps were being done. She was reluctant to share answers for fear of being caught with a mistake. As time went on, she adopted the practice of many of the classmates, which was to rush mindlessly through the work so that she could jump on the computer and play games. When asked about the student, the teacher described student B as a hard worker, but struggling with a D+ grade. So how does it feel to be a learner in that classroom, or this learner in that classroom?
Sounds very stressful. Like you don't want to be caught doing the wrong thing. Not a welcoming, warm, fuzzy environment.
Yeah, stressful, and you don't want to be caught, doing wrong. Okay, so somewhat stressful. What else?
Yeah, it's difficult to learn. I would think it's really not an environment you really want to learn. And I got triggered back to my own experiences going through math classes and, all the challenge and shame with not being good at math. So it doesn't feel like it's a positive learning environment.
Yeah, thank you for that, Steve. And I appreciate you being, a little open with us about, like, you flashback to these experiences that I had as a learner, right? So this second classroom is more typical of a quote, US approach to teaching mathematics. At least I'll call it a 20th century approach to teaching mathematics. And I know many of you, like me, are a little older. So that was our experience back in the day, where it was, here's the way you do it. You got to stick to it, do it my way. And if you get it wrong, you must not be that good at it. And it is very stressful. And I appreciate you saying, like, shameful, like almost embarrassed, right? Okay, and I see in the chat, there's some other things. Breeds competition and not learning, lack of real world connections, mistakes are not valued as learning opportunities, all of those things. So you can see there's a contrast in these two learning environments. Just before I forget to mention, I put the slides in the chat in case you wish to have those, so you're free to do that. I want to reveal some truth here. These two classrooms were 6th grade and 7th grade math classrooms. The student was the same student. The first story was the pseudonym that the researcher gave her is Nora. So Nora in 6th grade was the first classroom where she did so well. She blossomed. She connected with mathematics. She was excited about it. She was allowed to be creative, to share her thinking, to learn from others. And the researcher was so impressed with this that she came back the next year to follow up. How is Nora doing? She wanted to see what was going on in 7th grade and was quite dismayed to witness what happened in 7th grade, where this bright, excited, energetic learner became essentially marginalized in the classroom, and was described by the teacher as struggling with a D+. And the researcher, Maureen Hogan, she writes, neither of the teachers was wrong in how they assessed Nora as a learner of math within the design, discourse, practices, and expectations of their respective classrooms. Nora simply performed the roles and followed the scripts available to her in these two different learning environments. So for me, this explains really well the power of the teacher to create a learning environment that either affirms or denies students' sense of identity, students' ability to make sense of, in this case, mathematics or not. When the researcher asked Nora herself toward the end of 7th grade, what's going on in 7th grade? Nora said, well, the teacher only lets you learn some stuff. The teacher only lets you learn some stuff. So what she's describing in her 7th grade words is the teacher only set up this narrow way that math is taught and learned. And for Nora, she didn't fit inside those narrow boundaries, right? She was over here. The way that she processed information, the way that she wanted to communicate with peers to make sense, the way that she wanted to be more creative and not just do it one way, that was not allowed in 7th grade. And she could not learn as much as she wanted to learn. And so she was literally marginalized as a learner in that classroom. So she went from being, thriving, doing incredibly well, to struggling and being marginalized. And for me, this sums up quite well why we need to change the way that we have traditionally taught mathematics in this country, because we are marginalizing far too many students. And particularly, and if we were in a room together and have y'all talk to each other about this, like who are the students that become marginalized and dehumanized? And by that, I mean, they're not allowed to bring their sense of identity and have that valued in the math classroom. Who are the students who are more often than not marginalized and dehumanized in our math classrooms? You can throw stuff in the chat and have a conversation that way with each other. But I'll just, as you're doing that, I will just say in presentations that I've done with this over the last few years, what comes up is students with disabilities, students for whom English is not their first language, and often students from other marginalized population groups, Latinx students, African-American students, disproportionately are marginalized. And how do we know that? We see year after year in the data about student achievement that these same groups are doing poorly relative to other population groups. In my mind, this is not a reason to say that there's something wrong with this population. There's something wrong with our classrooms. There's something wrong with how we're giving them the opportunity to engage with mathematics or not, right? There's a problem that needs to be addressed in terms of the pedagogy, in terms of the curriculum. And so some of the work that I've been doing, I draw on scholars who have been working on this for 20 years or longer. And we've put it under this umbrella term of culturally responsive mathematics teaching. And I wrote a little paper about this, which I'll also share in the chat in just a moment, that talks about culturally responsive mathematics teaching, again, drawing on decades of research about this. And I describe it under 4 different elements. One is that you've got to have a classroom that supports deep learning. If you are honoring students' identities, recognizing funds of knowledge, and then only allowing them to go this deep with mathematics, giving them access to superficial content, you are not respecting them as learners of mathematics, right? So these lessons have to be focused on important mathematical relationships, concepts, and ideas. I'll say in my own teaching, when I taught up in the Bay Area, I taught in Hollister. At the time, it was not a brand, it's a city just east of Gilroy. When I taught there, my first assignment as a brand new teacher in 1992 was freshman algebra at the time. That's what 9th grade was. And the department chair told me right before school started, oh, don't worry, half the kids will fail. Just don't sweat it. I was rather shocked, but I tried not to just show that on my face. And I determined that was not going to happen in my classroom. And I found that the curriculum I was given did not help students connect. So I had to go to conferences. Honestly, 1992, there wasn't a lot of internet, right? I went to conferences, I got books, I talked to some friends who were trying to do similar things. And I was able to realize that math needed to be made familiar, needed to be made accessible to my students. They needed sometimes some hands-on materials, sometimes they needed to talk to each other about it. And so I gradually transitioned my learning environment to be more student-centered, to be more focused on sense making, and my students started to thrive. In fact, the second year that I was there, they wanted to compare my students to the other 10 sections of algebra because I was using some different materials, and my 3 sections ended up being outperforming the whole rest, every other section. And it's not because I had, quote unquote, the smart kids, right, as some people would think. These were just the average kids put into freshman algebra. They were not the honors students at all, but they suddenly found themselves learning mathematics in a way that made sense to them. And they got excited and they were willing to work hard, even go back and relearn some things that in the past were confusing because they suddenly realized, you know what, this thing between my ears, it's actually pretty powerful and I can do this. And so I had that experience year after year. I went to a middle school, the same thing happened. We went from the 23rd percentile in mathematics to the 65th. And that happened year after year. Again, it wasn't because I was drilling them on mathematical facts. It was because I was creating an environment that valued their ability to think and reason mathematically. And they just really clicked with that, right? That's human nature. So these characteristics of culturally responsive mathematics teaching are something that I communicate to our students in our credential program here in the foundational level math program. I also have a project funded by the National Science Foundation in which there are 20 teachers of middle school and high school mathematics who serve as the mentor teachers for our teacher candidates, right? So we place our candidates with these teachers. At the same time, they're learning with me and some other faculty about culturally responsive math teaching and transforming their own classrooms. And now that we're 2.5 years into the project, they're now starting to step out of their class, not out, but reach out beyond the walls of their classroom to other colleagues and say, here, why don't you try this? Hey, I tried this in my classroom. My students really responded. And they're also reaching out to administration, questioning some of the traditional practices like tracking in their schools. And so I want to play you just a little snippet of a webinar that we had just last week, actually, sponsored by Todos, which is an equity organization in mathematics education. You can see the whole thing. They put it up on YouTube if you wish to do that. But this clip is a middle school teacher in Norwalk, La Mirada district. And her name is Lacey Knight. And she is going to tell you just a little bit about her classroom and how she's transformed things. And I want to stop the sharing just for a minute because I think I need to share the sound a little bit differently. So just 1 second while I re-share. Let's see. Okay, optimize for video clip. Do that. And it'll be about 2 or 3 minute clip.
But now I'm seeing students be successful in ways that I've never seen before in my class. I remember a huge reflective opportunity was when we recorded ourselves doing a math talk. We had all taken a micro-credential course, which hopefully we'll have time to share with you later. But watching that video, I realized there were many times that I was kind of leading my students to where I wanted them to go. I'd give them little hints or clues because I wanted them to be successful. But since making that realization, my classroom environment has changed tremendously. So academic discourse is now deep academic conversations with lots of productive struggle. I focus more on clarifying questions that require students to extend their thinking, and I stray away from those leading questions. In my classroom, student-centered is now truly student-centered. I'm a facilitator. My students share authority in my classroom to the point where they know they're generating the knowledge that's being presented. And problem solving is actually problem solving now. They're completing tasks where they're using multiple strategies, multiple representations, and the learning is truly deep. They can explain their thought processes with more detail than I've experienced any year before joining this project. And I credit all of this to the deep understanding I have of CRMT and knowing the importance of getting to know my students and building a community in my class. And I want my students to know that all their voices are heard and all of their funds of knowledge are important. So on the next slide, I kind of want to share another addition to my teaching, which is incorporating social justice into my lessons. Like I mentioned before, my students are the ones that generate the thinking in the class. So early on in the school year, each year, I ask the students about what issues are going on in the world that are important to them. Now I teach 6th and 7th grade, so sometimes I have to give them a push on like what is important in the world. But I always allow them to add on to that because sometimes they're just not quite sure. But I want to make sure that I build on as many options as they choose so that I'm making sure I'm covering as many things that are important to them. And I want to make sure that they know their thoughts matter. So I have 2 examples here that I want to share just briefly with you about how we incorporate social justice into our lessons. The first task was inspired by the students caring about pollution and waste. So during our surface area and volume unit, we examined eco-friendly packaging policies in big companies. Online shopping is extremely popular, but all the waste that comes from the cardboard is really harmful for our world. So what the students did in this task, they were they examined surface area and volume of packaging. So the most important part beyond the mathematics is giving students a voice, or else you're just saying like, oh, there's this huge problem in the world and we're just gonna deal with it. So in this particular task, the students did one of two things. They either reached out to a social media influencer that they followed, and they encouraged them not to market any products that were packed inefficiently. Their second option was to leave either a positive or negative review on a recent product that was shipped to their home based on the packaging.
Okay, so what is it that you heard? Let's see, I'm gonna just unoptimize. What is it that you heard from Lacey during that little snippet of what she was sharing?
Yeah, this is Steve. So what I heard is actually connecting the material to stuff that students actually would care about, this packaging, the excess waste with packaging. So relating the material to things that are problems and issues that face us as a society. So as well as her own deep understanding, the teacher's own deep understanding of some of these issues of social justice and understanding some of the really the deeper, issues related to funds of knowledge and all that context stuff, that she brings as a math teacher, right? So she just doesn't know math. She has a lot more context even to the work that she's doing.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Steve. And I see in the chat, Megan says productive struggle is value, right? Letting the students struggle productively and connecting to their interests, their voice matters, right? She talked about looking at data and achievement, absolutely. Other thoughts, other things you heard in that? Yeah, productive rather than traumatizing, right? Creating this positive space. Thank you, Janice. I also mention, and this is in the, I can't play the whole webinar for you, but Lacey goes on to mention that something that she came to realize that she had sort of just taken for granted when she was teaching at this school, but she came to realize as an inequity, was that when students came into 6th grade, they were separated into groups. Oh, these are the honors kids and these are the non-honor kids. And the curriculum was the same, but obviously with the honors kids, they would go deeper, right? They would actually get to the mathematical meaning. They would get to the fun projects. And she came to realize the inequity of that. And it wasn't just, oh, we shouldn't separate kids. It was also the way in which it was happening was obviously correlated to demographic indicators of race, of language status, of disability status, right? And so through the work in this project, she came to realize how grossly inequitable and unjust that was. And so she saw in her own classroom, when she changed some of the things she was doing, which she was already a good teacher, right? But she changed some things to really get at deeper learning and having students drive their learning. She realized, oh my gosh, we can all be doing this, and all of the students can do so much more than we may have thought. And she started to share those ideas with her colleagues, and they started to pick up on that. And she mentioned her administration about the tracking issue and how maybe we should get away from that. That's not really supported by research, and they just kind of ignored her. And then the second year came and more teachers were on board with shifting what they were doing in classrooms. And she asked again, and it just sort of, oh, well, that's difficult. Surprisingly, this year, everyone's virtual, right? Distance learning. When she checked in and got her class list and started talking with her colleagues, they immediately noticed there was no honors math. There was 6th grade math. They all had 6th grade math. So the administration actually detracked. They finally listened to the data. They looked at what was going on. They listened to the teachers and they detracked. So they're no longer creating these artificial separations based on, in some cases, negative past experiences, in many cases, societal biases that get into education being part of society. So they've now moved to the 21st century where we understand the potential of all of our students and the need to really build learning environments that allow students to be successful and to build those positive mathematical identities. So I'm going to pivot now to talking a little bit about our foundational level math program. Some of you are familiar with it. It's been around since I was hired, 2005. And we really do focus on helping our candidates, our future teachers, learn to focus on the students, get to know their funds of knowledge, their communities, their cultures, their languages, and their identities, right? Focus on that, and also understand the inequities that exist as a result of historical practices. Schools are a part of society. Our society has historical biases. And then how do we address these? Things like the detracking conversation that the teachers in my project are having now with administration. They learn to focus on student engagement in mathematical thinking, reasoning, and problem solving. They learn to promote communication and interaction, including the use of students' L1, their first language, home language, heritage language, whatever you want to call that. We have, it just as an aside, we have a really strong bilingual authorization program at Cal State Fullerton. This year, we're expecting out of the 30 secondary candidates who will earn bilingual authorization, about 7 or 8 are in math or science. So that's really exciting. And districts like Anaheim Union High School District are hiring bilingual STEM teachers, and they have pathways at several of their high schools now, middle school and high school. So they have dual language pathways. We help our students to learn to focus on using multiple representations of mathematical concepts and relationships to help students make sense, to bridge from concrete to abstract. And we focus on mathematical relationships and connections that help build coherent understanding of concepts. I like to tell folks, you know, if you think of all the disciplines in school, there's exactly one that is entirely based on logic, and that's mathematics. Now, science comes close, I get that. But math is truly a logical discipline. And if we are generating students who come out of school saying math doesn't make sense, we've screwed that up. We educators, we've messed that up. That's on us, because the discipline itself is entirely logical and coherent. So we have to find ways to go from where our students are and how they think and use mathematics in their day-to-day lives, in their communities, within their cultures, and how do we connect that to this important content in the school. So FLM Credential, we're aiming at folks who are not necessarily, although they could be a math major, but most of our students did not major in math. Many of them do have a minor. We encourage them to minor in mathematics. Many do come from a math-based background. The foundational level teaching is really focused on middle school and into early high school grades. So the state will allow you to teach up through advanced algebra with an FLM credential. Most high schools want you to have a full math credential that includes calculus to be able to teach up into the higher levels of mathematics. So our program at Fullerton, since we have a separate math credential program and foundational level math, we focus more on middle school placements and middle school teaching, and our math program focuses more on high school. And we also work together. So we're not, you know, separate necessarily. That doesn't deny opportunities. Our FLM candidates always get hired. 80% of the courses in schools would fall under the math courses fall under the FLM umbrella in terms of what content can be taught by the holder of the FLM. They do need to know their mathematics, so CSET exams are required. I'm not going to talk about it, just mentioning that. We do have prerequisites for our program. Many of you are already familiar with these. One new one I want to point out, starting in fall 2021, anyone coming into Cal State Fullerton for a teaching credential of any sort, whether it's elementary, secondary, or special education, will need to have had an ethnic studies course. This is something that our dean, Lisa Kurtman, and our college feels very strongly about. In that first year that we're requiring it, it could be any ethnic studies course. By fall 2022, there's a list that's being generated that I'm sure Amy Nelson could provide if you wish to know that. So I just want to call that to your attention. And then the FLM program at Fullerton, we generally start every fall and every spring. This spring, we're not starting a new cohort, partly because of COVID and placements are incredibly tough. Still, half of our students were not confirmed placements for this fall. So that's very difficult. Also, with Dr. Waller being on leave, it made sense to not bring in a new group while she's not around. So we're not admitting new students to start the FLM credential in the spring, but certainly we admit students to work on the prerequisites all the time. Let's see. We do have funding available through the Math Science Teacher Initiative, of which I am the director. We give scholarships of $1,000 to $2,000 every semester We awarded $63,000 last year to students in our math and science credential pathways, including scholarships for future bilingual teachers. We have stipends and internships available through Misty as well. And the federal Teach Grant is something, if you haven't talked with Amy about it, is something you should talk to Amy Nelson and others at the Center for Careers in Teaching. It's a federal source of funding for future teachers in high need disciplines, of which math and science always are on that list. We do have other opportunities like adding authorization for multiple subject teachers. We do that through an advanced methods course that either Dr. Waller or myself teaches, and CSET exams. We have a master's program that is focused on secondary education with a math emphasis. We also have, through the project that Lacey and the other 19 teachers are part of, they have helped develop online modules for other teachers to learn skills of teaching culturally responsive mathematics. They've developed 12 of them. One of them is ready for prime time. We're actually offering it to teachers outside the project. The others we're piloting over the next 1 to 2 years. And so there will be a menu of 12 of these available. And the link is there. They're offered through our university extension. So you can check that out. And I am at time, Jack, I believe.
Yes, thank you.
She's asked you to complete a survey, and maybe your link is correct. I don't know. I put the link that I was sent, but use the one she put in the chat, because if it changed, I'm sure Jack would have the correct one.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
So yes, please access the survey link that's in the chat, just very quick session survey. If you need help getting to your next session, please let me know and I can provide you with that link, but all of the Zoom links are available on the agenda that Amy sent out in the file earlier. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, and thank you. I appreciate all the comments, and I'm at Fullerton, so you can reach out, email me if you have questions. I'm happy to engage with discussions of math teaching and creating more equitable math classrooms. So thank you. I appreciate your time.
Mark, I just wanted to quickly say thank you. I don't know if I'm a counselor at Fullerton College, and last week I met with a student who had bounced around and then made her way to me because she wanted to be a math teacher. And fortunately our cameras were on in Zoom, and when I explained the FLM option to her and I could see her face light up as a road to her career. Fortunately, she was my last appointment of the day, so I could go extra 45 minutes and just chat with her, and this was everything to her, that she has this FLM option. And I don't know that everyone knows about it still. I still feel like it's a little bit hidden. So I appreciate what you shared today, and that we have this opportunity for students.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate your work at the community college, because, you know, like half our students come from you all, right? They go through community college first. And so I appreciate you sharing the information with them. That's great.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of the day.